HighBridge Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Triumph of Doubt, Dark Money, and the Science of Deception by David Michaels. Read by Paul Boehmer. Publisher's Note: this audiobook refers to figures included in the print and e-book editions of the book. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Upton Sinclair. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. Brant Parker and Johnny Hart. No matter how cynical you become, it's never enough to keep up. Lily Tomlin. Chapter 1. Introduction. At halftime of the National Football League's 2015 AFC Championship game, the New England Patriots led the Indianapolis Colts 17-7. The game's stakes were high. The winner would advance to the Super Bowl. When the players returned to the field for the second half, the Patriots proceeded to score touchdowns on their first 4 possessions, blow the game open, and coast to a 45-7 victory. Within days, however, a strange rumor explaining the Patriots' second-half explosion spread among fans, trollers, and news media. As the rumor went, someone in the Patriots' locker room tampered with the footballs during halftime, then sneaked them into the game. Perhaps at the direction of the team's famed quarterback, Tom Brady, who reportedly prefers underinflated footballs. Was this how he was able to work his second-half magic against the unwitting Colts? The national intrigue that followed was immediately and predictably labeled Deflategate. Media scrutiny centered on the sport's most famous player and required a vigorous response in order for the league to show it was committed to ensuring fair play. The competitive context in this story was more complicated than an investigation of alleged cheating. Led by Brady, perhaps the best active quarterback and, at the age of 38 at the time, also the oldest, the New England Patriots had dominated pro football over the previous 13 years, winning 3 Super Bowls and losing 2 others. In an era of parity in the league, this success was unprecedented, affording the Patriots a large and devoted fan base, as well as utter contempt from fans of other teams. The Deflategate allegations fit a pattern of competitive misbehavior that, fairly or not, had followed the Patriots for years. In 2007, the team was publicly judged guilty of cheating after an episode in which they videotaped opposing teams' play-calling signals. This prompted many owners of other teams, as well as some of the league's fans, to believe that at least some of their rivals' remarkable, sustained success was unearned. Now it seemed the Patriots were doctoring footballs too. According to most reports, there was no love lost between Patriots owner Robert Kraft and the other 31 team owners, who together pressured league commissioner Roger Goodell to use the deflated footballs as justification to punish the storied franchise. But Goodell couldn't do this without sufficient proof that Brady and, presumably, a Confederate in the locker room had deflated the balls. Toward that end, Goodell did what many corporate leaders have done for decades when they desperately need science to be on their side. He turned to the professionals who produce reports that predictably reach conclusions favorable to their clients. This book is not about Deflategate. None of the episodes and issues I'll discuss here are as trivial as the allegation that a celebrated quarterback may have cheated in a big football game. The subjects here are deadly serious, including a different NFL story, brain injuries. The knee-jerk behavior demonstrated by the NFL in Deflategate is pertinent only because it's a notorious episode that vividly demonstrates the reach of an instinctive, systemic corporate behavior, one that flies mostly under the media's and the public's radar. Rare is the CEO today who, in the face of public concern about a potentially dangerous product, says, "Let's hire the best scientists to figure out if the problem is real, and then, if it is, stop making this stuff." In fact, evidence from decades of corporate crisis behavior suggests exactly the opposite. The instinct is to take the low road, deny the allegations, defend the product at all costs, and attack the science underpinning the concerns. Of course, corporate leaders and anti-regulation ideologues will never say they value profits before the health of their employees or the safety of the public. They'll never say they care less about our water and air than environmentalists do. But their actions belie their rhetoric. Decision-makers atop today's corporate structure are responsible for delivering short and long-term financial returns, and in the pursuit of these goals, a certain dissonance creeps in. Profits and growth above all else. Avoidance of financial loss to many corporate executives is an alibi for just about any ugly decision. Of course, decisions at the highest level are also not black and white or remotely simple. They're dictated by factors such as the cost of possible government regulation, perhaps combined with loss of market share to less hazardous products. And, of course, the companies are afraid of being sued by people sickened by their products, which costs money and can result in serious damage to the brand. And all of this is part of the corporate calculus. Most people, especially Americans, have come to expect corporations to demonstrate mercenary behaviors. It's in the corporation's DNA. We don't expect mercenary scientists. Science is supposed to be constant, apolitical, and above the fray. This book is about those science-for-sale specialists and the product defense industry that sustains them, a cabal of apparent experts, PR flacks, and political lobbyists who use bad science to produce whatever results their sponsors want. It's a version of the old garment center joke. Turn on the blue light. The man wants a blue suit. There are a handful of go-to firms in this booming field. In the example of the NFL and Deflategate, Commissioner Goodell hired Exponent, one of the nation's best-known and most successful product defense firms. These operations have on their payrolls, or can bring in on a moment's notice, toxicologists, epidemiologists, biostatisticians, risk assessors, and any other professionally trained, media-savvy experts deemed necessary. Economists, too, especially for inflating the costs and deflating the benefits of proposed regulation, as well as for antitrust issues. Much of their work involves production of scientific materials that purport to show that a product a corporation makes or uses, or even discharges, as air or water pollution, is just not very dangerous. These useful experts produce impressive-looking reports and publish the results of their studies in peer-reviewed scientific journals, reviewed, of course, by peers of the hired guns writing the articles. Simply put, the product defense machine cooks the books, and if the first recipe doesn't pan out with the desired results, they commission a new effort and try again. I describe this corporate strategy as manufacturing doubt or manufacturing uncertainty. My objective is to identify, characterize, and illuminate this strategy so listeners can understand exactly what these mercenary scientists and the firms that hire them are doing. In just about every corner of the corporate world, conclusions that might support regulation are always disputed. Studies in animals will be deemed irrelevant, human data are dismissed as not representative, and exposure data are discredited as unreliable. Always, there's too much about the evidence, not enough proof of harm, not enough proof of enough harm. It is public relations disguised as science. The company's PR experts provide these scientists with contrarian sound bites that play well with reporters who are mired in the trap of believing there must be two sides to every story, equally worthy of fair-minded consideration. The scientists are deployed to influence regulatory agencies that might be trying to protect the public or to defend against lawsuits by people who believe they were injured by the product in question. The corporations and their hired guns market their studies and reports as sound science. But actually, they just sound like science. Such bought and paid for corporate research is sanctified, while any academic research that might threaten corporate interests is vilified. There's a word for that. Orwellian. Individual companies and entire industries have been playing and fine-tuning this strategy for decades, disingenuously demanding proof over precaution in matters of public good. For industry, there is no better way to stymie government efforts to regulate a product that harms the public or the environment. Debating the science is much easier and more effective than debating the policy. In earlier decades, we have seen this play out with tobacco, secondhand smoke, asbestos, industrial pollution, and a host of chemicals and products. These industries' strategy of denial is alive and well today. Nor is this practice of hiring experts and hiding data about harms limited to health concerns and the environment. Beyond toxic chemicals, we see it with toxic information as well. Consider the corporate misbehaviors of Facebook, which serve as a pertinent sidebar to my story. I am not asserting that the conclusions of every study or report produced by product defense experts are necessarily wrong. It certainly is legitimate for scientists to work to prove one hypothesis in the cause of disproving another. One means by which science moves toward the real truth is by challenging and disproving supposed truth and received wisdom. Maybe there are two sides to every story, but maybe not two valid sides, and definitely not when one has been purchased at a high price and produced by firms whose financial success rests on delivering the studies and reports that support whatever conclusion their corporate clients need. The strategy of manufacturing doubt has worked wonders as a public relations tool in the current debate over the use of scientific evidence in public policy. In the long run, product defense campaigns rarely hold up. Some don't pass the laugh test to begin with. But the main motivation all along has been only to sow confusion and buy time, sometimes lots of time, thereby allowing entire industries to thrive or individual companies to maintain market share while developing a new product. Doubt can delay or obstruct public health and environmental protections, or just convince some jurors that the science isn't strong enough to label a product as responsible for terrible illnesses. Eventually, as the serious scientific studies get stronger and more definitive, and as the corporate studies are revealed as unconvincing or simply wrong, then generally forgotten, with the authors paying no penalty for their prevarications, the manufacturers give up and acknowledge the harm done by their products. Then they submit to stronger regulation, sometimes even costing themselves more money than they would have paid in the first place. But they can do the math. They have also been making a lot of money for all those years. Their wealth compounds. And as for the people who have been sickened, or worse, in the interim, or the despoiled environment, well, Those are unfortunate. Sorry. And what happens to the product defense firms? There's always another opportunity to manipulate the vulnerabilities at the intersection of science and money. In Deflategate, Exponent's official report enabled the NFL's attorneys to assert, 4 months after the game in question was played, that experts found no set of credible environmental or physical factors that could completely account for the change in pressure of the Patriots' footballs. Combined with other circumstantial evidence, it was more probable than not that the balls were intentionally deflated. To be fair, the NFL also relied on texts and other evidence suggesting that the game balls may, in fact, have been deflated. But Exponent had done its job, providing the conclusion that was useful to the NFL to build the case for the quarterback's guilt. Goodell suspended Brady for 4 games in the ensuing 2015 season, fined the Patriots $1 million, and stripped the team of its next first-round draft pick. One can imagine the legal wrangling that followed the suspension. The case ended up in federal court, and the legalities spilled into the new season starting that fall. Brady's suspension was therefore held in abeyance. He played the entire 16-game season and playoffs, and the Patriots were defeated in the AFC Championship game. He served the 4-game suspension in 2016. His team won 3 of the 4 games in his absence and, eventually, with Brady back at the helm, the Super Bowl yet again. They returned to the Super Bowl in 2019 and won for a total of 6 wins and 3 losses, 9 total appearances in 17 years, which is beyond ridiculous. Exponent's report to the owners ended up being an embarrassment to the NFL. John Leonard, a roboticist and mechanical engineering professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was one of the early skeptics about Exponent's work and conducted a series of analyses that demonstrated that the original calculations were incorrect and that no nefarious deflation actually occurred. Leonard's very compelling lecture on YouTube has been viewed more than 300,000 times. Since he lives and works in Massachusetts, Leonard could be suspected of bias, but he turns out to be a turncoat in this regard. He roots for the Philadelphia Eagles. Nor is he alone in his criticisms of the Exponent report. Faculty at Carnegie Mellon, the University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, and other academic centers have all pointed out errors in the report. So, this was not the product defense industry's finest hour, just an indicative one, and one that received more national attention than most. Early in my career, I practiced and taught epidemiology, which is the study of the health of populations. I specifically studied the links between disease and workplace exposures, including substances like asbestos, lead, and other chemicals. In 2001, I decided to shift the focus of my research to public policy and the application of the findings of epidemiology to disease prevention. Since then, I have written extensively about public health harms and environmental degradations perpetrated by various industries and defended with boilerplate, uncertainty campaigns. This career within the career was launched, maybe I should say inspired, by the years I served under President Bill Clinton as Assistant Secretary for Environment, Safety, and Health at the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE. The agency's name suggests engagement with issues involving oil and electricity generation. Reportedly, the initial understanding of President Donald Trump's DOE Secretary, former Texas Governor and presidential candidate Rick Perry. But those are actually minor considerations for this agency. Its primary activities are the production of nuclear weapons and cleaning up the messes resulting from their production. I was, in effect, the chief safety officer for this weapons program. The job there was a particularly challenging one, to protect the workers, community residents, and environment in and around the nation's nuclear weapons complex. These facilities had harbored, and in some cases still do harbor, huge amounts of the toxic chemicals required to make the plutonium and highly enriched uranium at the core of nuclear weapons. Manufacturing and testing these weapons almost necessarily exposed thousands of workers to chemicals and radiation and created some of the most dangerously polluted locations in the country. This was a very exciting period to be at the Department of Energy. The United States and its allies had won the Cold War, and it was time to reassess the nation's need for a large nuclear weapons arsenal. It was also time to revisit the DOE's unstated policy to pretend that these exposures never made workers sick. Deny and defend was the sardonic label used around headquarters, if not in the paperwork. Workers at sites all around the country believed that their exposures had made them sick, and their government did nothing to help them. I visited with many of these workers and saw that in many cases they were right. Clearly, those with chronic beryllium disease had developed this disabling condition in machining the beryllium, a toxic metal, used to help maximize the power of an atomic explosion. For other workers, it was less clear that workplace exposures were responsible for their conditions, but none of them trusted DOE to honestly adjudicate their claims, and they had good reason. Apparently, the agency's institutional leaders had feared that simply acknowledging that workers were being overexposed to radiation or toxic chemicals would have damaged the nation's ability to make the weapons needed to first win World War II, then the Cold War. Secretary of Energy Bill Richardson asked me to find a solution to this unfair catch-22. Our new initiative resulted in President Clinton's apology to these workers. More important, legislation passed by Congress and signed by the President set up a workers' compensation program that, to date, has awarded more than $16 billion to workers and the families of workers who became sick following exposure in these weapons facilities. The saga is a lengthy chapter, Making Peace with the Past. In my previous book, Doubt is Their Product. Of course, the weapons program did not end with the Cold War, and controlling worker exposures and limiting pollution going forward would not be easy. Many of the facilities were old and technologically outmoded. Under my leadership, we issued a series of new safety and health regulations. Several of them improved nuclear safety in the weapons industry. The most important was a strengthened beryllium standard, which DOE staff, with the help of academic experts, had been working on for several years. Then it was full steam ahead, and as we developed and then finalized the workplace beryllium exposure regulation, I witnessed firsthand exactly how corporations that make dangerous products can manufacture uncertainty to slow down the regulatory process. Even though the strengthened DOE rule governing beryllium would apply only to government facilities, the beryllium industry opposed any change at all. Why? Because a new DOE standard, especially one developed with great care and caution, would increase the likelihood that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, would follow with new rules that reduced exposures at the private sector facilities under the agency's jurisdiction. There are many such facilities, because beryllium is a remarkable metal, lighter than aluminum, yet stronger than steel, and its alloys and compounds exhibit all kinds of unusual characteristics, making it valuable in all kinds of industrial applications. The beryllium industry engaged a product defense firm, Exponent again, to convince the DOE that there was too much uncertainty to move forward. It was clear to me that they were applying the model perfected by the tobacco industry. manufacture uncertainty about the science to avoid having to reduce exposure or compensate victims. That was a long, hard-fought battle, truly scientific and legal trench warfare. But in the end, we substantially won. With the election of President George W. Bush, I left the federal government and returned to academia. Now knowing all too well what tactics to look for, I saw that the beryllium industry's efforts were not unique. Tobacco's model was alive and well. In fact, many of the same scientists who had worked for the cigarette makers were now plying their product defense trade on behalf of asbestos, benzene, chromium, and a host of other toxic chemicals. And the new Bush administration was using the arguments provided by these mercenary scientists to slow down implementation of public health and environmental protections. As I uncovered more and more about these efforts, I published several articles and commentaries in Science and in other academic journals, identifying the problem and suggesting policy solutions. I titled my piece in Scientific American, "Doubt is Their Product," a phrase from the memo of the tobacco industry executive who candidly described that industry's efforts to refute the studies that demonstrated the deadly effects of cigarette smoking. "Doubt is our product," he wrote, "since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public. It is also the means of establishing a controversy." The piece in Scientific American led me to write the book of the same title, with the subtitle, "How Industry's Assault on Science Threatens Your Health." That evolved into a massive research effort. There was no end to the evidence left behind by beleaguered industries, 85 pages of footnotes, 1,100 references. The book was well received in the scientific community, but it clearly hit some nerves in the corporate world. I was asked by the Defense Research Institute, the attorneys who defended corporations, and their uncertainty campaigns, to debate Dennis Postenbach, one of the product defense scientists whose work I pilloried in the book. I accepted the challenge. If I was willing to say something on paper, I should be willing to say it in public, including in front of an audience of a few hundred attorneys who represent some of the nation's leading polluters. A roster that includes some of the country's largest and most powerful corporations. The debate would have been the opportune moment for Postenbach to identify the many mistakes I had made in Doubt is Their Product. It must have been frustrating for him and the audience that he could not identify a single one. To this day, no one has. I say that not to be self-aggrandizing, but to convey that there is a factual bottom to every issue, and that's what Doubt is Their Product conveyed, and what this book conveys too. In both, some of the stories of industry's malfeasance are so flagrant some listeners may think, "Oh, come on, this can't possibly be true." Alas, every story is true. After I left the Department of Energy, I was happy in the private sector, teaching and writing at George Washington University. I had not planned to go back into government service until President Barack Obama asked me to take the reins of OSHA. I could not refuse. This position, technically Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is the single most important position in the area of worker safety and health in the nation, and the one from which I could make the greatest contribution to public health. The average tenure for an OSHA administrator is about 2 years. Before me, no chief had served for even 4. Too often, political appointees to federal regulatory agencies hold the office for 2 or 3 years, time enough to add the position to their resume, gain name recognition for speaking and consulting gigs later on, Then head for the revolving door.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?